The night was full of smoke and screams. The sky above burned with falling fire from ships that no longer looked human. In the middle of the chaos, a small boy named Eli ran through the ashes, his hands covered in dust. He was only 12, but his eyes already knew what fear meant. He had lost everything: his village, his father, even his small wooden home that once smelled of bread. Soldiers from the alien empire had taken them all. They said humans were slaves now, property of the stars. Eli did not understand why. He only knew he wanted to find someone to save, not to be saved. That night, while sneaking near the slave cages, he heard a soft cry. It was not human. It was lighter, softer, almost like a song breaking apart. He moved closer and saw her, a small alien girl with pale purple skin and silver eyes that glowed in the dark. Her wrists were chained, her dress torn. She looked like a bird whose wings had been broken. When she saw the boy, she froze. Humans were known as cruel, but this one looked different. His eyes were kind, his voice gentle. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl blinked slowly, her chains clinking as she moved closer to the bars. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking like wind. Eli shrugged. "Because you're scared, and I don't like when someone is scared." He looked around. The guards were sleeping, their helmets off, their weapons leaned against the fence. He could smell metal and oil everywhere. The boy picked up a small stone and started hitting the lock carefully. "My name is Eli," he said. "What's yours?" She hesitated. "Lyra," she whispered, her name like a whisper of light. Eli smiled, even though his lips were bleeding. "Nice name," he said. "When we grow up, I'll marry you." He said it so simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. Lyra frowned, confused. "Marry," she repeated. "What does that mean?" Eli thought for a moment. "It means I'll stay with you forever, and no one will ever hurt you again." The girl looked at him silently, as if she didn't know whether to believe it or not. The lock clicked open, and for one small second, her wrist was free. She lifted her hand to the night sky and saw the twin moons above, glowing over the desert of ruins. She smiled for the first time in her life, tears shining in her silver eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Eli nodded. "You're free, even if it's only for tonight," he said softly. But before he could open the second chain, the sound of footsteps came closer. Lyra panicked and pulled her hand back. "Go," she whispered. "They'll catch you." He shook his head. "I promised, I'll come back. I swear I'll marry you when we grow up." His voice trembled, but it was full of courage. He looked into her glowing eyes, memorizing her face through the bars. The girl pressed her hand against his, her small fingers trembling. "Then I'll wait," she said, her voice soft but full of faith. The guards shouted, lights turned on, alarms screamed through the night. Eli ran, sand hitting his face. He looked back once and saw her being pulled away by the soldiers, her eyes still searching for him through the smoke. He hid inside the ruins, his heart beating like thunder. Every sound echoed in his mind. The promise, her eyes, her tears. He knew they would take her far away, maybe across the stars, maybe somewhere humans would never reach again. But he also knew one thing: he would never break that promise. Years later, when people spoke about the invasion, no one remembered the boy or the slave girl. The galaxy moved on, empires changed, and the stars forgot. But somewhere, on a forgotten world, a small boy looked at the night sky every evening, whispering her name again and again, Lyra. He didn't know that far beyond the broken moons, a young alien girl whispered the same word before she slept. Eli. Their worlds apart, but their promise still alive, burning quietly under the broken sky, waiting for the day destiny would bring them together again. Many years had passed since that night under the broken sky. The stars had changed, the war had ended, and new empires had risen from the ashes. The name of the old slave camps had faded from memory, but not from her heart. Lyra was no longer a frightened child in chains. She had grown into a tall, graceful warrior with glowing silver eyes and markings on her skin that told stories of freedom and fire. The Varine were no longer slaves. They had fought for their own skies and won, and Lyra had become one of their youngest commanders. They called her the Queen without chains. She had power, respect, and an entire fleet under her command. Yet, inside her, There was still a quiet emptiness, a single voice from a long time ago that never faded. "When we grow up, I'll marry you," the boy had said. Sometimes at night, when her ship drifted through the stars, she would stare at the twin moons of nearby worlds and whisper his name, Eli. Her advisors often told her to forget the past, to focus on building the future, but she couldn't, because everything she had ever become was because of that boy. His kindness had been the spark that started her fire. He had given her the courage to believe she was more than a slave, and that memory was something she would never abandon. When reports came to the Vereen Council about lost human colonies near the edge of known space, something inside her stirred. She volunteered immediately for the mission. No one questioned her decision. She was too powerful now to be denied. Her ship, the Radiant Wing, left orbit and entered the dark stretches of the frontier. Every planet she visited carried whispers of scattered humans trying to survive. She helped them rebuild, offered food, medicine, and peace. But secretly, she searched for only one thing: a name, Eli. On the fifth world she landed, a desert planet scarred by ancient war. She walked among the people dressed in simple armor, no crown, no title, just a traveler. She asked the elders if they had ever heard of a human boy who once freed an alien girl from the cages. Most shook their heads, some laughed, but one old woman paused, her eyes narrowing with memory. "There was a boy," the woman said slowly, "a strange one, who once freed something not human, long ago, before the suns dimmed." Lyra's heart skipped. "Where is he now?" she asked quickly. The woman pointed toward the mountains beyond the ruins. "He lives there, in the old mining camp. Some say he still fixes machines for food. Some say he talks to the sky." Lyra stared toward the horizon, her throat tightening. After all these years, after endless battles, and countless worlds, she was close. That night she stood at the window of her ship, watching the twin suns fade into blue dusk, the same kind of dusk she remembered as a child. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Eli, if you are still alive, I'm coming." Her officers did not understand why their commander looked so emotional. They had seen her fearless in war, cold and unshaken before death. But now she looked almost human, fragile, yet brighter than ever. When morning came, her ship hovered low over the mountain valley, scanning for signs of life. There were no settlements, only broken buildings and the sound of wind. But then, on the scanners, a single human heat signature appeared, moving slowly through the dust, working near a rusted power tower. Lyra's heart raced, her breath trembling as she said softly, "Land here." The soldiers looked confused but obeyed without question. As the ramp opened, sunlight flooded her face, and she stepped down into the sand, her boots sinking into the earth that felt strangely familiar. She looked across the ruins and saw him, a man with dirt on his face, tools in his hands, his hair now streaked with gray. He turned slowly, feeling the shadow of the ship behind him, and froze, his eyes widened. It was a face he had never thought he'd see again, glowing silver eyes filled with tears. Lyra took a step forward, her voice breaking. "Eli," she whispered, "you kept your promise. You survived." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind moved softly between them, carrying the memory of that night long ago. Two children who had promised the impossible, now standing as two souls who had finally found each other again, across stars, across lifetimes, and across destiny itself. The boy who had freed the slave, and the girl who had become a queen, were face to face once more, under the same sky where their story had begun. Eli stood frozen in the sunlight, his heart pounding as if time itself had stopped. The years of silence and dust fell away in a single heartbeat. Before him stood the girl he once freed, no longer small, no longer chained, but powerful, radiant, and yet still carrying the same soft eyes that had looked at him through the cage so long ago. He dropped the wrench in his hand. It clanged against the dry metal ground. He wanted to speak, but words felt too small. His voice cracked softly. "Lyra." She smiled, and that smile carried all the stars between them. "You remember," she whispered, and for the first time in years, Eli laughed. A short, broken laugh filled with disbelief and relief. "I never forgot," he said quietly. "How could I?" She stepped closer, her armor shining with faint blue light, dust swirling around her feet. Behind her, the Varine soldiers waited respectfully. None dared interrupt. They had heard their queen speak many times, but never with such tenderness, never with tears in her voice. I looked for you everywhere, Lyra said softly. Every planet, every station, every whisper of your name. Her eyes shimmered. You were my promise, Eli, my reason to survive. Eli lowered his gaze, his hands trembling. I didn't think you'd remember, he said. I thought you'd become something greater, someone far beyond me. Lyra reached out and touched his face gently. The touch was warm, real, alive. You were the reason I became anything at all, she whispered. The villagers hiding nearby watched in awe. They had seen alien ships come to conquer, never to cry, never to kneel, but when Lyra stepped closer and embraced the old mechanic, it felt like watching the stars themselves bend toward the earth. He told her stories of what happened after she was taken, how he was sent to the mines, how he escaped, how he built small machines to help people survive. He had stayed because he couldn't leave the world where he had met her. I couldn't go, he said softly. Every night I looked at the moons and hoped you were alive somewhere. Lyra listened, silent tears tracing down her skin that shimmered like silver rain. You waited, she whispered, even when you didn't have to. Eli smiled faintly. You waited too, he said. We both kept the promise, didn't we? But before she could answer, one of her officers hurried toward them, fear in his voice. Commander, we have detected enemy signals approaching from orbit. Lyra's smile faded. She looked toward the sky, dark dots appearing like scars across the sun. Eli frowned. Enemy, he asked. Lyra nodded slowly. Old masters of the slave worlds. They don't forgive freedom easily. She turned to her soldiers, her voice sharp now, filled with command. Prepare the shields. No one touches this ground. Then she looked back at Eli. You must come with me, she said. You'll be safe on my ship. But Eli shook his head. This is my home, he said firmly. These people need me. I can't leave. Lyra looked torn, her heart at war with duty. If you stay, you'll die, she whispered. He smiled gently. Then I'll die free, just like you taught me. She stared at him for a long time, remembering the boy who once broke her chains, now standing like a wall between his world and the darkness coming from the stars. Then I'll fight with you, she said finally, her voice trembling but strong. If this is your home, it's mine too. Eli looked at her, unable to speak, the promise from childhood now reborn not as a dream, but as a bond stronger than any war, stronger than fear. The sound of engines filled the sky as enemy ships entered the atmosphere. Dust and light rained down. The villagers ran for shelter, and the old mechanic and the alien queen stood side by side, staring up at the storm together. He reached out his hand, and she took it, their fingers locking like a bridge between two worlds. We'll keep the promise, he whispered. Lyra smiled. Until the end of stars, she said. The wind howled, the ships descended, and the forgotten human and the once enslaved alien stood ready to face the galaxy together. The sky was no longer calm. Dark ships burned through the clouds like falling blades. The enemy had come again. The same slavers who once ruled both humans and Varine, their banners of iron and flame cutting across the horizon. Eli and Lyra stood together at the front of the village, dust rising around their boots. The air smelled of oil and fear. Villagers hid inside old shelters while children clung to their mothers. For them, aliens always meant pain, but now another alien stood between them and death. Lyra gave commands to her troops, her voice steady but fierce. Her soldiers formed defense lines around the humans, energy shields lighting up like blue walls of light. Protect the civilians, she ordered. No one touches this ground. Eli looked at her, his heart heavy yet proud. You sound like someone who's been waiting her whole life for this moment. She smiled slightly. Maybe I have. The first blasts hit the valley, shaking the ground. Dust and heat filled the air. Lyra's ship returned fire, bright blue beams slicing through the enemy. Explosions bloomed like burning stars. Eli ran toward the power tower, connecting old wires to supply energy to the shield. He worked fast, his hands bleeding. Lyra saw him struggling and rushed to help. Sparks flashed between them. You're still fixing everything, she said softly. Even the sky. Eli grinned, sweat dripping down his face. You're still breaking chains, he replied. Suddenly, an explosion threw them both to the ground. The force ripped through the sand. Enemy soldiers landed nearby, black-armored and ruthless, the same kind of monsters who once chained her as a child. Their voices hissed through helmets. Capture the Vereen Queen alive. Lyra stood, her eyes glowing brighter. No chains, she whispered, and fire erupted from her weapon. She moved like lightning, her energy blades carving through the soldiers. Each strike a memory of her past pain turned into strength. Eli picked up a fallen blaster and covered her from behind. His aim was rough but brave. Together they fought like two souls burning with the same fire. The enemy fell one by one, but more kept coming, waves of metal and hatred. The sky was filled with light. The ground trembled under the war. Still they did not step back. Lyra took a hit to the shoulder. Sparks burst across her armor. She staggered, but did not fall. Eli rushed to her side, helping her stand. You can't fight them all, he said breathlessly. I'm not fighting them all, she replied. I'm fighting for you. He froze for a second, the words striking deep, but there was no time to respond. The largest enemy ship descended, its shadow covering the valley, its cannons glowing red. Lyra activated her communicator, shouting, Radiant Wing, fire everything you have. Her ship roared above, releasing blinding light. Explosions tore across the enemy's fleet. The sound shook the heavens, the chain of fire climbing toward the clouds. When the dust settled, silence fell. The enemy's ships burned in the distance, wreckage falling like black rain. Lyra fell to her knees, exhausted, her armor cracked, breathing heavily. Eli knelt beside her, placing his hand over hers. It's over, he said quietly. But she shook her head, her eyes scanning the sky. No, this was only the first wave, she whispered. Eli looked at the ruined village, smoke rising, people crying, the smell of metal and ash in the air. He sighed deeply. You could leave. You have ships, a home, everything. She looked at him, her eyes soft but unyielding. You are my home, she said simply. The words hit him harder than any blast. He wanted to argue, but something inside him broke. The wall he had built over years of loneliness. He reached out and touched her face gently. Then we rebuild together, he whispered. She smiled faintly, pain in her eyes but light too. Together, she said. That night, they worked side by side, helping survivors, building fires, treating wounds, humans and Vereen working as one for the first time in generations. There was no talk of race, no talk of power, only people trying to live under the same wounded sky. When the moons rose, Lyra sat beside Eli on the hill overlooking the ruins. You once told me I was free, she said softly. But tonight, you are the one I see free, not afraid, not running, standing with me against the stars. Eli looked up at the twin moons, glowing faintly through the smoke. Maybe freedom was never about escaping, he said. Maybe it was about finding someone worth staying for. She smiled through tears, leaning her head on his shoulder. The war still burned far away, but in that moment, peace existed, fragile, warm, and real. The boy who once broke her chains now had his own broken, and the girl who had once waited beneath the broken sky finally found where she truly belonged, not in palaces, not among fleets, but beside the human who had promised her forever. Morning came quietly, soft light spreading across the ruined valley. The air smelled of burned metal and dust. The silence felt peaceful, but both Eli and Lyra knew it would not last. The war never ended with just one battle. Lyra stood on the cliffside, her armor cracked and her silver eyes glowing faintly. The twin suns reflected off the debris of fallen ships. She watched the sky with calm sadness. Her communicator blinked red. New signals, strong, cold, moving fast. The enemy was coming again, this time with everything they had. Eli walked up beside her, his hands still wrapped in bandages from last night's repairs. How bad is it? He asked quietly. Lyra's voice was low. Worse than before, she said. They've called their fleets. They want this world destroyed. They want to erase us both. Eli looked at the village below, at the humans and Vereen working together, fixing shelters, sharing food, healing wounds. Then we don't let them, he said simply. She turned to him, her expression soft but determined. You talk like a soldier. she said with a small smile. He shrugged. I learned from the best, he replied. The villagers gathered as Lyra's troops prepared defenses. Shields were rebuilt, weapons recalibrated. The air buzzed with tension. The sound of engines echoed faintly from above. The second wave had arrived. The sky turned red as enemy ships broke through the clouds, like angry gods descending, their cannons glowing brighter than the sun. Lyra raised her hand, her voice steady. All units, prepare to defend. The battle began. Beams of light tore through the air. The valley shook. Humans who once feared the Varine now fought beside them, side by side, passing ammunition, helping the wounded, shouting in unity. The line between species blurred. They were one people now, defenders of the same sky. Eli stayed near the power tower again, controlling the shield manually. The circuits overloaded again and again, sparks cutting his skin, sweat blurring his eyes. He refused to stop. Lyra fought above him, her blades glowing blue, her armor scorched by heat. She was unstoppable, every swing a memory of her childhood chains, every strike a promise that she would never kneel again. The ground cracked as enemy drop pods slammed into the earth. New soldiers poured out, huge machines following behind. The humans screamed, but Eli ran straight toward the danger. Keep firing, he shouted. Don't stop. He picked up a rifle from a fallen soldier, aiming at the towering machine. He pulled the trigger until it overheated, metal burning his palms. Lyra saw him through the smoke, her heart pounding. She jumped down from the ridge, landing near him. You're going to get yourself killed, she said angrily. He smiled faintly, his face covered in dust. You said we fight together, he replied. Before she could respond, a blast hit the ground near them, throwing them apart. Eli rolled across the dirt, pain shooting through his body. When he looked up, he saw her, pinned under debris, trying to move but unable. He crawled toward her, dragging himself across broken glass and fire. Lyra, he shouted, coughing. Hold on. She tried to smile, even in pain. You never learned to run away, she whispered. He reached her and began pulling the metal off her armor, piece by piece, his hands bleeding. You promised to stay, he said, voice breaking. I'm not leaving, she whispered weakly. Not now, not ever. The enemy ships circled above, charging their final weapon, a light that could burn the entire valley in seconds. Lyra's communicator blinked again, showing one last chance. A planetary defense grid buried beneath the mountain. Eli looked at it, realizing what it meant. If we activate this, it will destroy everything in orbit, he said. Lyra nodded slowly. Yes, but it needs someone to trigger it manually. He looked at her, and she already knew what he was thinking. No, she said firmly. You can't. He smiled softly. You said we both fight for home. He said, let me protect it. Before she could stop him, he kissed her forehead gently, then ran toward the tower, the last working circuit flashing red, the wind howling around him. Lyra screamed his name, her voice echoing through the valley. Eli, no. He turned once, smiled, and whispered, you're free now. The light exploded across the sky. The mountains trembled. Enemy ships disintegrated into fire. The night turned brighter than day. When it was over, only silence remained, dust falling like snow. The valley still and quiet. Lyra crawled toward the tower, her body weak, smoke rising everywhere. She found the metal bracelet he always wore, lying on the ground beside the melted console. She held it to her chest and closed her eyes, tears glowing like tiny stars. The war had ended, but not the promise. The light faded slowly, leaving the sky torn and silent. The twin suns dim behind clouds of smoke. Everything around looked like ashes of a forgotten dream. Mountains cracked, ships burned, and the valley that once held life was now still. Lyra opened her eyes, every breath heavy, her armor broken and skin burned from the blast. The ringing in her ears faded, and all she could hear was the whisper of the wind. She tried to move, but pain shot through her body. Still, she forced herself to crawl through the wreckage, calling one name over and over, Eli. There was no answer, only the smell of smoke and melted metal, the ground still warm from the explosion. She saw the remains of the power tower where he had stood, everything twisted and blackened. Her heart sank as she crawled closer, her fingers shaking. Among the ashes she found it, His bracelet, half melted but still shining faintly. The same one he had worn since the day they met. She picked it up gently, pressing it to her chest. Her tears mixed with dust and ash. "You kept your promise," she whispered, voice trembling. "You saved them all." The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of burnt earth. She could hear distant voices now, survivors calling, humans and Vereen emerging from the ruins. They had lived because of him, because of the boy who refused to run. She stood slowly, her strength returning with every breath. The soldiers gathered around her, their faces covered in soot and grief. "Where is the human?" one of them asked softly. Lyra looked at the sky, her voice calm but hollow. "He's part of it now," she said. "He's in every star that still burns." She lifted her communicator, sending a signal to her ship. "Radiant Wing, begin evacuation of survivors." Her tone was steady though her heart broke with every word. This planet belongs to them now. No more chains, no more war. Her officers nodded in silence. None dared to speak. The humans stared at her with tears in their eyes. They had feared aliens once, but now they saw her differently. Not as a conqueror, not as a queen, but as someone who had lost just as deeply as they had. When the last ship left the valley, Lyra stood alone where the tower had once been. She opened her palm and looked at the bracelet again. It glowed faintly in the light of the setting suns. She whispered softly, "You said forever, Eli, and I'll keep that." Years passed, but the memory did not fade. Stories spread from world to world about a human who destroyed an entire fleet to save both races, and about the alien queen who mourned him under two suns. Together they became a legend, the bond beyond stars. Lyra built a monument at the heart of the new city that rose from the ruins, a statue of a human boy holding a broken chain toward the sky. Beside it stood a smaller statue, a Vereen girl reaching out her hand to his, their fingers almost touching, but never quite meeting, forever reaching. People from across the galaxy came to see it. Children placed flowers there, whispering wishes to the stars. The place was called the Valley of the Promise, and every night, when the twin moons rose, the statues glowed faintly blue, as if remembering. Lyra ruled with wisdom and peace. Her name carried weight not because of power, but because of kindness. She never remarried, never sought another companion. Her heart was already given to the human who had freed her soul. Every year, on the day of the last battle, she returned to the same hill where they once sat together, watching the sky. She would sit quietly, holding the bracelet, speaking softly to the wind. "You see, Eli, they are free now," she would say. "Humans and Vereen, side by side. No more fear, no more cages." And when the night grew silent, she looked up at the stars, and for a brief moment, she swore she saw him there. A faint shimmer of light smiling back, the same eyes, the same warmth. She closed her eyes, smiling softly through tears. "You promised to marry me when we grow up," she whispered. "And maybe, somewhere beyond these stars, we already did." The wind carried her words through the valley, across the ruins, through the galaxies beyond, and somewhere, far from sight, the stars seemed to flicker just a little brighter. Because promises, the kind made from pure hearts, never die. They live forever, in the silence of the cosmos, in the hearts of those who remember. Decades passed, yet the galaxies still spoke of that day. The day the skies burned and one human saved two worlds. No song, no story, no history scroll could capture the full weight of what he had done. But the stars remembered, and so did Lyra. She ruled not as a conqueror, but as a guardian. Her people followed her with devotion, and humans trusted her like no other. She united planets that had once fought for centuries, her voice becoming a symbol of peace. "No chains," she would always say. "Not for any world, not for any soul." The Valley of the Promise had become sacred, a place where both humans and Vereen would come to remember the one who ended the war. At the heart of that valley stood the monument, the human boy holding the broken chain, his gaze lifted toward the stars, beside him the alien girl forever reaching toward him, their fingertips almost touching. Every evening, as the twin suns sank into the horizon, the statues glowed faintly blue, the same hue as Lyra's eyes, and people said that when the wind blew, it carried two voices whispering softly, together. Lyra aged slowly, Her kind lived far longer than humans, but time could not touch the sadness in her eyes. Every day she led, every law she made, every world she healed, all of it carried a piece of him, Eli. When ambassadors asked her once why she had never chosen another ruler beside her, she smiled and said, "Because I already have one." Her tone calm, but full of longing. The council understood and never asked again. Under her leadership, the Human-Varine alliance grew into something the galaxy had never seen. Former enemies stood as brothers, trade routes opened, cities flourished, even old enemies began to speak of peace. Yet Lyra's chambers remained quiet, always facing the same stars, the same direction where she had lost him. One night, during the Festival of Remembrance, when fireworks danced across the twin moons, Lyra stood alone on her balcony, her long silver hair glowing under the starlight. She looked out over her empire, the cities alive with joy, children of both races laughing together. It was the world Eli had dreamed of. She whispered to the wind, "You see, Eli, they kept your dream alive," her voice soft and proud. "Your promise built this galaxy." That night, she wore the bracelet he had left behind, now reforged in silver and crystal. She had never taken it off since that day. To her, it was not jewelry. It was his heartbeat, his memory, his vow. As she closed her eyes, a gentle breeze touched her face, warmer than any she had felt in years. The candles flickered, and for a heartbeat, she felt a hand, invisible but real, rest over hers. She opened her eyes and smiled, whispering, "You came back." To the guards outside, it looked like she was simply resting, her head bowed gently, her eyes closed, but her lips carried a faint smile, peaceful and light, the kind one wears when meeting an old friend. At dawn, the palace bells rang, not in sorrow, but in reverence. The queen without chains had passed away quietly in her sleep, the bracelet still glowing faintly on her wrist. They buried her in the Valley of the Promise, beside the statue of the human boy. At her request, no gold, no jewels, only a single line engraved on the stone between them. He freed her from chains, she freed the stars. Centuries later, travelers from distant galaxies would visit that valley, reading the inscription and feeling something stir in their hearts. They would look at the statues, the boy and the girl forever reaching for one another, and wonder if such love was truly possible. And somewhere far beyond, where light and time no longer mattered, two souls walked together under the same starlight, no longer divided by species or space, their hands finally touching. He looked at her, the same smile as the boy from long ago. "Told you I'd come back," he said. She laughed softly, tears glowing like stars. "And I told you I'd wait." The universe around them shimmered, infinite and endless, but for them it was home. And thus, the legend of Eli and Lyra became eternal. The human who kept his promise, and the alien queen who built a world upon it. Because in every galaxy, on every world, under every sky, love and courage speak the same language, and promises made from the heart never fade. They become starlight, forever guiding those who come after.